Okay, welcome everybody to the webinar. I'm excited to get us started with today's discussion. Today's webinar is going to be on kind of part of our youth series, and this is the third of the three webinars that we've conducted on Generation Z and Millennials in 2023. And today's webinar is going to be focused on their kind of employment. I'm joined with Allison Watson. She's Associate Vice President out of our Edmonton office, and really excited to kind of dive into kind of the results of some of this research focused on kind of the employment piece when it relates to young people. And there are kind of three key kind of areas that we're going to be covering off today. The first is kind of a portrait of young workers today and kind of what their wants and needs are, what their behaviors are. Then we're going to dive into kind of, the company's responsibilities and the manager's responsibilities as it pertains to kind of answering kind of what those wants and needs are when we're talking about millennials and Generation Z in kind of the labor market. Just a very quick kind of overview on, how the data was collected and what we did. We conducted an online survey of among 3,000 millennials and Generation Z across Canada. So about 2,000 of that was millennials and about 1,000 of that were members of Generation Z. So in terms of the demographic makeup, we had, good balance between kind of official language status as well as education levels, got an insight into kind of their overall housing situation, and ensured that we kind of had a little bit of a diverse sample, including people from kind of minority communities as well as part of the research. So kind of to start, we're going to go into detail a little bit about, what the data tells us about young workers today, and specifically, where they are in life and what they expect from an employer. Some of this might not be surprising, but over the last year, there have been some notable shifts in kind of what we've seen important to young people. And one of the first shifts can be found around the discussion on the Great Resignation. Last year there was article after article after article about how employers were going to be facing a wave of resignations. A lot of that was due to the pandemic fatigue. A lot of people fed up, questioning their life choices, looking for a complete revamp of their life, whether that be, where they currently work, wanting a workplace where they can work from home, maybe, a complete career shift, or moving, kind of leaving the city, leaving the country, and reimagining kind of what they want out of life. So, the findings from this year, we only see about 13% wanting to leave their job in the next year. And importantly, when we look back to 2021, that was about a quarter of young people saying that they want to leave their job. So a significant drop of about 12% here. So, one of the things that's, insightful here is kind of that slowing down of that trend, people wanting to leave. And I think part of that kind of focuses back onto some of the earlier webinars we've done as part of this series that focused on millennial finance, with the upcoming kind of economic uncertainty around kind of a possible recession, the labor market tightening up, look at all the layoffs happening kind of in the tech sector. Our finance webinar really focused on how young people are more and more concerned about their financial future. And I think that leads into people being less likely to take risks, especially kind of switching jobs at a time of economic uncertainty. When we look at kind of who wants to leave, again, it's kind of that younger cohort, that 16%. And I don't think that's necessarily surprising given where they are in their life stage, still trying to figure out what they want out of their careers, where they want to go, trying new jobs, maybe jumping jobs because they don't like where they might have started. Whereas the, older millennial, the 35 to 39 or 34 to 39-year-old, less likely to leave. They're the ones who are going to stay at their current employer. So, reading into that, where they are in their current life stage, maybe they have a house, maybe they have started a family, it's less likely that they're going to be willing to, take a risk, especially when you factor in kind of the economic uncertainty that's around the corner here. So, if they're more likely to be staying with their employer, and the Great Resignation ship kind of has sailed for the most part, what should you know about your young employees? So I think what's interesting here is that there's kind of like a split between the two types of kind of young worker. There's one who's ambitious, and there's one who's, just going to get the work done. And so we see that on the left side here. At your job, do you consider that you do more than what is expected from you? 47%, or 48% responding to you do what is expected of you. So, kind of even numbers there in terms of folks who kind of are a little bit more go-getters in the workplace, and folks who just, they're showing up, they're doing their job. And that's kind of the be all end all. But when we look at, are you interested in managing employees in your lifetime, which is more of a forward kind of looking question. It's getting them to consider where they want to be in their career. 43% saying yes, that they would are interested in managing employees in their lifetime. But again, we see that little bit of a split with that 42%, almost even number there between the two, saying no. What I think is important to keep in mind in this is, among those who say yes here, who are the folks that are likely to want or interested in managing employees in their lifetime? And I think the key number here is that 61% here of folks who say that they want to leave their job in the next year. 61% are interested in managing. Part of why they might be leaving that job is they want to look for new opportunities, new challenges. If you're passing over folks in your organization who ultimately in themselves see a trajectory in their careers, I think that's important to zero in on and start engaging young employees at an early stage in their lifetime with your organization, to get them to think about what does staying on look like long term for me? Are there the challenges that I need? Am I going to be able to get into positions of leadership in this organization down the road? I think that's where kind of some of the tactical stuff comes out of this, and it really is focused on engagement with those young employees. So what should they expect from their organization? We talked about kind of a little bit about that in the last slide. There are two that kind of pop here, which is the new challenges and a promotion. Both of these obviously are, again, forward thinking. It's about the young person being really engaged in their own career development. I mean, salary increase is always going to be seen as something that, they want to see offered all the time, especially now given inflation and the rising costs of everyday goods. But when we look past that, it's really kind of those intrinsic pieces of, wanting to grow as an individual, wanting to grow in their career. And, ultimately, those new challenges, new responsibilities are really seen and manifested in a promotion, moving up kind of the company ladder, and getting access to kind of more challenges, more responsibilities. So 52%, they want to see those challenges and responsibilities every year. A quarter saying that they want to see a promotion every year. With that kind of new challenges and new responsibilities, new tech tools. So you can kind of read into that, learning new hands-on skills to be competitive, adaptive, bringing new kind of solutions to problems in the workplace. So we've learned that young people are split between kind of this ambitious side and go with the flow side. But one thing that I think is for certain is this kind of piece of autonomy. And over the next 3 slides, we're going to talk about how that is different. There's kind of 3 distinct areas where they're seeking autonomy. And I think this one, autonomy by the hour, isn't something that is necessarily surprising here. Obviously, this has been blown up as a result of the pandemic, people realizing, hey, I can work from home. I, can take out the trash, I can do the dishes, squeeze in little house tasks throughout the day. And still get the work done. And I think this has opened people's minds up that, hey, this 9-to-5 schedule, I don't know if it's for me. I don't know that, I want to continue doing this for another 10, 15, 20, whatever years. So 79% said that they would like something other than a 9-to-5 schedule here. So if you think about all the interruptions you might have in a day, a sick kid, an appointment, maybe a young person, there's a 1-day sale at a favorite store of theirs that's from like 9 to 11. And it's like, I don't know, a holiday gift that they have to run out and get. Hard to do that when you're on a 9-to-5 schedule. So part of it is reimagining what the work schedule looks like. So, we asked them, okay, if you don't want to work a 9-to-5, what does that look like? What does the alternative look like to you? Quarter said that, maybe it's just about the number of hours to work per week. As long as I hit that and it's distributed in a way that works for me and my schedule, I'll do that. 21%, maybe it's more task oriented. So if I need to get maybe 3 projects done in a week, I can schedule my time around ensuring those projects get completed. And 19% said maybe it's just a number of hours per day. So maybe it's that 8 hours per day, but maybe I work from 6 a.m. to 10 and then come back later in the evening to round off the final 4 hours. So young people are really thinking about kind of how can they, schedule in some of the stuff and the autonomy that was a little bit afforded to them as a result of the pandemic and working from home. And conversely, maybe folks as well who didn't have the opportunity to work from home, obviously have friends, have family who have that kind of balance and want to see that in the workplace that they're currently in. The autonomy to choose. So I think this one is related to kind of that hourly aspect. It's, showing up for work. The traditional model of face-to-face work in the office at your desk certainly isn't something that many folks want to see as the be-all, end-all. If they had a choice, 39% would kind of favor that face-to-face work, but we see, greater percentage here around some hybrid 50-50, whether that be remote or in person. And 33% kind of really wanting to see the ability to just work remotely. I think the key here when we think about this isn't that it's about the choice of the individual. It's about giving the space to allow for different work styles, different work ethics to be able to flourish, right? So when we think about, that hourly aspect and giving that autonomy to folks who, want to be able to choose when they want to work in terms of an hourly basis or how they want to work, maybe, having that office space separate from home is really important to them, or maybe, it's just much more efficient to be able to work remotely. It's having that choice and allowing and knowing that, each individual young person as an employee doesn't fit a specific box or a specific mold. It's about ensuring that the organization is adaptive to be able to meet a bunch of different people's needs while working and getting things accomplished. And that kind of brings us to that autonomy of the organizations itself, right? So we kind of asked, is your employer kind of sufficient in some of these areas? So on the slide here is the percentage where they're not kind of meeting the mark. So about 40% saying the organization is not agile enough, the hierarchy is too much, not focused on environmental issues, which we know from kind of last week with Allison's webinar that the environment was very important to young people and especially attaching it to, not only their social values, but also where they work. 35% and 31% kind of feeling that, not listening enough and not enough kind of work-life balance. And I think these last two is where work really needs to be done to shore up the standing organizations have among their employees. And that ties into the last two kind of autonomy pieces here. If workers are saying that they want kind of one area of work-life balance, whether that be remote work or whether that be dictating their own hours, having that discussion is important, and being there to listen to, okay, how can we meet kind of your needs? How can we support you in developing a work schedule that makes sense is important for organizations. And I think that main hurdle is the agility aspect, whether or not, the hierarchies are able to shift with the times and able to adapt to things. I know that, at the beginning of the pandemic, many organizations didn't have the capacity to remote work. And it was like, well, we got to figure this out. How are we going to continue if the world's going to shut down and everyone's going to be working remotely? So thinking about kind of that time and, organizations moving fast to solve a problem, really bringing in those tools that were used to, think about a long-term solution to get folks really focused on building that autonomy for young folks. So kind of before I pass it off to Allison, ultimately, this discussion on autonomy is something employers really need to consider. I think it moves beyond kind of that pre-pandemic, oh, we've got a foosball table in the lounge for young people, so they're going to be happy here. And it's more so shifting to a mentality that you're offering something that's intrinsically valuable to young people. We know time is valuable. We know that, the working on their own terms of that face-to-face or remote work is valuable. So having that discussion and responding to those needs is incredibly important to retain young people, because otherwise, if they're not finding it with your organization, they're going to find it somewhere else.
Thank you, Nick. I'm sure a lot of that resonated with many people on the call today, whether you are a young worker yourself or an employer of a young worker. So thank you for that great summary. And that really leads us into the next section here. So what are a company's responsibilities in engaging, retaining, working with a young worker? So we'll recap quickly what Nikolas kind of presented to all of us. So the young workers today are staying put, at least for now. They're doing what is expected of them, at least, if not more. Some do and some don't want to manage people, depending on where their ambitions lie. Sure, they want more money, but more importantly, they want new challenges and responsibilities. They want to choose when and where they work and how their workday looks. And they want their employer to be more agile, as Nick just really well kind of summed up for all of us in that last slide. But what does all of that mean for managers and companies? So we're going to look at companies first. It means besides a good salary and flexible schedule, they want good benefits and job security. We saw in our presentation last week that youth are very focused on the security of their future, whether it's their personal finances, the economy as a whole, or as Nick highlighted earlier, the environment and environmental factors. So it's really no surprise that they would want that from the company that they're working with as well. They also want a company to be honest and transparent. We know youth today are very questioning, and they're not afraid to challenge or fact check what they're hearing and seeing. So it's really important for companies to establish that trust with their young workers and work to maintain it. Each of these needs are very basic, so paychecks, benefits, security, honesty, and really not that surprising, at least to us, in a world that has seemed so uncertain for youth today. So not really surprising that they'd be looking to have those basic needs met, at least from the company level. What's really interesting, though, is as we get more personal in the qualities that we tested among youth, allows me to develop as a worker, contributes to my well-being, has values that are similar to mine, has a good reputation, respects my privacy. Youth are less inclined to indicate that they need that from a company. But we just heard from Nick that a lot of those qualities are something that defines them as a worker and things that they want. So where do those all fall in? And that brings us to the next section. That brings us to the manager's responsibilities. So we'll skip a couple. Thank you, Nick. So youth today need their more personal needs met by their managers. Currently, youth do feel that their current managers and direct supervisors are focused on company objectives, they're open to discussion, and they're competent. So high level, great. They trust that you've got the interests of the company, they trust that you're listening to them, they believe that you're at least competent in the role that you're in, so that's really good. Where they feel that managers could be doing a little bit better at is be more egalitarian with men and women, being sensitive to mental health issues. Something that we've seen really prevalent among youth today is that need, that focus, the open and honest and transparent communications and conversations revolving around mental health. We also see this need being higher among women than men, as Alana noted in our presentation last week, some of the reasons that may be. And they're also more, we want managers to be more on the lookout for the latest technology. And that again goes back to some of those points that Nikolas went over in regards to new responsibilities, followed by adapting new technologies and promotions. So kind of all tying in together here of what they need from their manager. But when it comes to the most important things that they're looking for in a manager, we see creating a pleasant work environment, being honest with them, just like they need from their company, listening to their needs, helping them develop as an employee, having clear expectations of them. These are the attributes that contribute more at a personal level, at least in our opinion, or my opinion and our opinion. And this is where the manager comes into play, that more direct personal connection. So we also feel that these qualities really build off of each other, and you can't have one without the other, and they're all going to work together in order to create that more pleasant environment. So having clear expectations communicated leads to helping them develop as an employee, as does being listened to. The need for honesty comes from listening, which again supports development, which all again leads to making that pleasant environment for a young worker to be and to engage in. So I don't think it's a stretch, as we have in the title of this slide, to say that youth today need and want their managers to be their life coaches. So just going on to the next slide, life coaches might seem a little bit daunting. Young workers see their manager as their direct support to develop and grow, which, as I just mentioned, can seem really daunting and maybe unrealistic to some who may be hearing it. But is it really? For a generation that is so connected with the world around them, is it really that surprising that they would want to feel connected to their manager, to see them as a life coach, as a mentor? This is how we connect towards workers today, at least from our perspective. This is how we meet in the needs and retain young workers today. Companies need to provide the overall stability, but it's the managers that need to make the connections. It's the managers that will make the environment that make it so young workers today want to be a part of it, want to grow, want to develop, and see themselves within that organization and within that team moving forward. So a shorter presentation that we had for all of you today, but I think we kind of summarized maybe some things that weren't that surprising, some things that we've kind of seen from last year over to this year, but really seeing that shift in how young workers today perceive the role of the company in their work environment compared to their manager. So we will have since this is our last presentation, we will have the report in everyone's inbox who registered to all of the webinars in each of them before Christmas here, so within the next week or so. And we do have a few questions in the chat box, and we do open it for everybody to go to the Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Allison. I think we got a couple here, so maybe we can walk through some of them. First question here, do you think the current economical climate impacts these generations on their decision to keep their jobs? Yeah, I think, looking back to kind of our finance webinar, there is a little, degree to which young people are concerned about making kind of these big moves in their life right now. And I think, not only in this data, but kind of what's in the news and some of kind of the interviews that's been happening with young people and the labor market, certainly folks are a little bit more cautious. And I think this goes across all generations, but certainly among young people, especially because, there's a lot of risk for young people to kind of make these kinds of moves. And when we're looking at kind of these industries that are impacted, where young people are flocking to, thinking about kind of tech being one of the bigger examples, there's certainly a strong degree of kind of the current economic climate playing a role in that decision-making process.
Thank you, Nick. Another one that we had is, have there been noticeable differences between provinces concerning the desire to keep the same job? We did dig into this a little bit, and it's throughout all of these employment sections within the survey, it has been fairly consistent across the provinces when we go specifically over the rest of Canada. While the majority of respondents from all provinces indicate that they're not likely to leave their job in the near future, we do see a stronger sense of wanting to stay put for the time being among Albertans compared to the rest of the country at the moment.
Just looking through the questions here.
For the voter intention question, Nick, we'll have to refer them to, if you go to leger360.com, we'll have all of our provincial federal polling results available there for any questions that you may have regarding that. We have a question regarding the summary of the webinars. That will be done in the report that will be released by the end before Christmas.
Yeah, and there's also a question here about just about in terms of do people trust higher layers of administrations above their super? We don't have it kind of by role at the organization. We did have kind of a confidence question in our first webinar where we talked about kind of the institutions, whether that be government, private companies, et cetera, and the level of trust that folks have in that. So we can get that number for you, but that's also included in our first webinar that will be included in the report as well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, was there anything that you found surprising about the research for when we spoke about kind of the employment aspect of things?
Yeah, I think for me personally, it would be the ambitions piece that Nikolas went over, specifically those who are doing just what's expected of them, being so equal to those that are doing more. I think that really speaks to perhaps some of the sentiment about the future, maybe that feeling overwhelmed, unsure of what's to come, is that them just doing, as Nikolas noted, what's needed to kind of stay employed and do what they need to do because they don't know if this is where they want to stay or where they're going to go, or is it because they just lack ambition? I would tend to say it would be the earlier, not the latter. I feel that we do have a ambitious youth based on some of the endeavors that they take outside of work and where they place some of their focuses. But it is surprising, probably to a lot of employers too, that perhaps that doing more than was expected wasn't as high as perhaps some may have would like to see.
Yeah, I guess so. One question here in terms of noticeable differences between the Gen Z and millennials. I think one of the first ones there was the piece on whether or not you're thinking about leaving your job in the next year. Certainly those younger folks trend higher a little bit in terms of wanting to leave. And so I think that kind of sets the tone, really, because, you know, they're a little bit more risk adverse. They're a little bit more likely to want to be in the stage of exploring where they want to see themselves in the future. So, you know, that difference there really stands out because it plays into the rest of the data when we're looking at kind of the split between Gen Z and millennials. Also have a question here, whether or not there was any kind of gender differences playing into the employment. I think, you know, we had that question about looking at folks who saw themselves as wanting or interested in kind of a managerial position or managing employees in the future. And it did trend more so toward men. So when we think about, you know, are we kind of hitting that trend or moving toward that kind of equity aspect in terms of gender, I think, you know, there's still some work that needs to be done. Part of it might be, you know, providing a path and exploring, you know, opportunities and reaching out directly to your employees about what's available to them and kind of the future that they might have in their organization to see themselves in kind of that managerial kind of role.
Mm-hmm. And I think the trending to equity piece there, and one of the questions is, we don't necessarily have the smoking gun question in the data to be able to answer that from the study, but I think based on how prevalent that has become over, even within this study over the past couple of years, of how important that is for youth, I think a lot of employers and companies are really striving not only for gender equality, but any of the, you know, DEI ambitions and goals that companies be having to make it more equal for all. Was there a difference between Gen Z and millennials in their ambitions? So this was actually really surprising to us when we were going through the data. The entire employment section was really consistent among both cohorts. One thing I can say about the ambitions, if we look at specifically those who indicated that they feel that they're doing more than expected, this increased with age, which again was another trend that we saw in, you know, in the maybe more pessimistic views or the more worry of financial stability, doing more than was expected is, while maybe not statistically significant, it does trend up with age. So those, of course, who are older millennials would be more so likely to indicate that they are doing that than the younger. However, I don't know if that's a product of them being less ambitious. I think it's just a product of where they are in their life currently. And perhaps the younger millennials and Gen Zs are just more unsure of if this is where they're going to stay and then if this is the career that they're going to have, because they're more likely to pivot and turn.
I guess question here just about unionized versus non-unionized. We didn't have kind of a split between that, but certainly something we can consider for future research as well.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Any other questions? All right, we'll give everyone some time back. And oh, one more question.
Kind of the question here, you mentioned that managers need to make strong connections with their young employees. What are the key elements we can measure to make sure we're succeeding? I think, one of the things that is probably the gateway to all of that is the openness and transparency piece in terms of the communication that happens with young employees. So, maybe it's not specifically measuring that connection, but I think it's establishing kind of a culture or workplace where, communications aren't seen as kind of this top-down thing. So going back to that hierarchy aspect, it's almost as if it's a cultural shift that still needs to happen with young people in terms of how they view their employer, and kind of tying into Allison, that life coach aspect. So all of that is more so kind of behavioral and building the pieces that are necessary to have that open dialogue of, what does a workday look like for you? What does the future look like for you at the organization? So it's more so, I think, related to that than maybe measurement specifically on, how are we succeeding here? I think it really is focused on maybe providing that, more personal kind of connection with the employee.
Have you ever cross-referenced the employee's idea of they're doing more than expected versus what the manager seems? That is a wonderful question. Something we don't have because we don't do a manager side, managerial perspective survey, but that would be an interesting perspective to take and something perhaps that we can explore in the future.
Okay.
All right, everybody. So yes, on behalf of Leger and our entire youth study team, thank you for taking the time. If you've been with us for all 3 sessions, we greatly appreciate you